Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel with your hosts Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone, it's good to be back with you on Truth Be Told, our YouTube site that Mike Maney and myself team up on. And I think today is session number 22, if I'm correct. Today is March the 10th, 2021. And we've been kind of cool and rainy here through the night today. I think our high today is about 50, so I think we're not too much warmer than you today.
Yeah, it's nice today. I mean, it's cool, but the sun is shining. That's all we care about.
Well, the sun's shining here right now, but I think we're supposed to get a little more rain, and this has been a very dry, rainy season for us, and we're just about at the tail end of the rainy season.
Oh, nice.
So there's probably going to be all sorts of water restrictions and raising the rates for using water and all that this year, but it's kind of common here in California.
Yeah.
Anything west of the Mississippi often has very dry years.
Yeah.
And we depend either on the Rocky Mountains or the Sierra Nevadas or the Wasatch or whatever mountain range we're talking about. Depend on lots of snow in the mountains, so that when we don't get much rain in the lowlands, somehow that snow melt will eventually get down to the farmland.
Well, like you were saying last week, if the governor and the state would just build your dams and hold it in reservoirs, you'd be in really good shape.
We would pretty much never have a water problem.
Yeah.
But we need about twice as many dams as we have now. The way California politics are right now, there's no way the environmentalists would allow that to happen.
Right. Yeah.
So we keep expanding in population, even with people moving out.
Yeah.
And not expanding the basic resources of like water.
Yeah. Doesn't make sense. No. I think it was a couple of days ago, I was noticing that the snow had melted in my backyard. I could see all grass. There was not one snowflake. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's great.
But is the grass green?
No, it's not green. It's all dead. Yeah. But then by late afternoon, I looked out my window in the backyard again, and it was all white. Snow was coming down. So that was short-lived. But it's melted again. So that's what spring does. This weird
back and forth.
Yeah, back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah. I love studying history, and even the Bible talks about this. That language of the time when the kings go to war.
Yeah.
What that means is early summer. Late spring, early summer.
Yeah.
And for most of the world, because certainly they couldn't fight through the winter with their kind of equipment they used and their horses and marching and all that. And then, for us in California, I think, well, why don't they start in early spring? Well, in early spring, in most of the world, it's almost worse than snow and ice. It's mud.
Yeah.
There's no way you can transport troops and animals and equipment. And I'm reading some of the battles in history, especially before the 20th century. And if for whatever reason they had to fight in the spring and travel, that talk about having to abandon their equipment because it was all bogged down in the mud and how difficult it was to move the troops. In many ways they preferred the snow and the ice if they had to travel over the spring mud. So the time when the kings went to battle is in the summer. The Bible uses that language. Yeah.
It's a good thing that George Washington wasn't reading the King James at Valley Forge. He ignored that memo or whatever. Plowed through.
So anyway, we've been everyone who watches these videos probably says I don't need to repeat this every time. But just as a reminder, we are attempting to recreate in our own way that great sermon Jesus preached after his resurrection to those two disciples. And beginning at Moses and all the prophets. He expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. And we're trying to create that in our own way by going through the Old Testament, looking at familiar Bible characters and stories, promises, but looking for Christ.
Yes.
And looking for the gospel. And it's been a real enjoyable experience for us. I've enjoyed preaching the sermons at Liberty on this and then using those basic outlines for our discussion. And, if we can just help somebody along the way to gain a greater appreciation for the Old Testament as part of the revealed, inspired scriptures, and be able to look at the Old Testament with fresh eyes, to be able to see Christ everywhere. It just brings a new breath of life to it.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a deeper element to it, rather than just talking about what that particular story is about, looking at it. Then after you do that, or go through that exercise, then ask yourself the question, is Christ in this somehow? And by looking at the sermons of the early church and the apostles, that's all they had, and they were able to do it easily. And they just preached wonderful messages about Christ, about the future judgment, about the resurrection, about the end times, about all the promises, about the purpose of his death, all of that, and then more from the Old Testament. So we kind of tend to limit, and this is a failing on our part, but we tend to limit his death, purpose of his death on the cross, to our initial salvation and our forgiveness of sins. So we don't sound like, we just don't want people to think we're minimizing that part of it. But there's so much more to his death, so much more to his resurrection, the purpose of his death. And we're trying to bring out some of those things from the Old Testament. And a lot of it has to do with what we talked about last week. We strung a bunch of verses together from the Old and New Testament on the subject of bride, of marriage to Christ. And there's some big ideas that merge together or converge together that really intertwine and flow all the way through the Bible. And one of those is the idea of the end goal of marriage to Christ. Might look at it this way, that when God created Adam, placed him in the Garden of Eden, and said it was very good, we said last week, the fact that it was very good doesn't mean God was finished. Now, he was finished with that original creation, but for some reason, he wanted the idea of a bride to be a separate event. And I think to highlight the importance of it in the Bible. When God said it's not good for man to be alone, so he created Eve for his wife, instituted marriage, that was not like a new discovery to God. It's not like God said, wow, I didn't quite do a very good job of creating Adam. Now he's lonely, and I didn't anticipate that.
Right.
And we don't know how long after Adam was created that Eve was made from his own body, taken from his side. God understood it all along that he was going to give Adam a bride, but he wanted Adam to come to an understanding, I think, of loneliness, of the sad side of being alone, having no partner compatible with you. It appears God allowed him to name all the animals and to start tending the garden. And it just appears God let enough time pass to implant within Adam a deep loneliness. You say, well, why wasn't God enough? Why wasn't God's beautiful creation enough for Adam? But God created Adam in such a way that he needed to be social and have intimate relations with someone of his own kind. And however long it took to develop that, we don't know. But God let it develop before he created Eve. And he did that in a garden setting. And the reason that's important is this is where these two ideas kind of merge together, is that God's working to get us back to a garden setting in Eden, in fellowship with God. So the Bible opens and closes with that theme. You might say that's a purpose of Christ's death and resurrection, is to get us back to that place of beauty, of satisfaction, of curses removed, of fellowship with God. But the Bible also opens and closes then with, once the garden setting is in place, then the added idea of a bride is brought into that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's borne out in the New Testament too, when Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. Mm-hmm. And then when that place is ready, then the marriage takes place. Mm-hmm. So it's like the marriage is an added event to sometime after the garden setting is in place, something like that. I'm just thinking that the same formula or the same way of progression in original creation happens when the last Adam is given a bride by his father. And the only way that could happen is if the last Adam also went into a deep sleep, which he did on the cross. Mm-hmm. And because of that, a provision for a bride. So when God said about Adam and Eve, the two shall be one, Adam said that, and God said, if bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. God instilled that understanding into Adam. In his image, another one in his image. So in some way, God wanted Adam to feel incomplete without a bride. Mm-hmm. And we think, well, Christ is back with his Father. He's restored to the glory that he had with him. But in some way, even Christ himself, his mission is incomplete until after that marriage, mm-hmm. because that's part of the plan. Mm-hmm. And that's part of why we need to be resurrected into glorified bodies, is because he has a body. Mm-hmm. He doesn't marry spirits.
Right.
So.
There's a proverb that comes to mind. I don't know. Don't ask me where it's at. But it says that we're supposed to prepare the field on the outside first, and then the house. Mm-hmm. And I've often wondered, well, why would that be? And I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is, in order to sustain a house or provide, the provisions for a house, you have to have a field that's productive.
Mm. To sustain those.
To sustain it, yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. So the world, the earth, the place that Jesus said, I go to prepare, which what you just mentioned, he's preparing the field, as it were, and then getting it ready for his house. And so it's kind of in that same order that
it is. It's good. So we're kind of merging this idea of getting back to Eden with the addition of a separate event called a wife or a bride. And that's part of enjoying the garden setting that Christ is preparing a place for his bride, is so that they can enjoy each other within that beautiful setting. And today we're going to also not introduce, but maybe enlarge a little bit, a third theme that merges with the other two of getting back to Eden and having a bride. And it's called the blessing, the birthright blessing that God gave to Abraham. Abraham passed down to Isaac, that Isaac passed down to Jacob, and that Jesus passed on to his church. And I think officially. It was an official act whenever Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and when Jacob did to Joseph's two sons, especially Ephraim, a ceremony, a literal action of putting hands on the head or on the shoulders and officially pronouncing the blessing. So it was not just some kind of generic thing. It was something that they recognized what was happening. And when Jesus was ready to ascend, there in Luke 24, 50 and 51, it says he lifted up his hands and blessed them. And then that's when he ascended. And he was passing on, I think, the Abrahamic package of blessings, promises, the covenant, whole idea of it, which is called in the Lord's Supper, it's called the blood of the new covenant, the enlarged Abrahamic covenant. And so he lifted up his hands and he blessed them. And as he was blessing them, they saw him depart from them in the ascension. And the reason I call that the official or the passing on of the blessing, when Paul was talking about the Lord's Supper in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 16, when he's talking about the cup, he calls it the cup of the blessing. In most translations, I don't think the Old King James, the New King James, probably most of them don't. I didn't check it out. But in the original language, there is a definite article in front of blessing, the cup of the blessing. And isn't that what we're doing when we take the Lord's Supper? Is we're acknowledging that the church has the blessing of Abraham passed on to him, the blessing of Isaac and Jacob, the blessing that came to Christ, embodied in him, and then when he lifted up his hands, he passed it on to the church. Now, it's only to the church from Christ, because he has it contained in himself, but he passes it on to his seed, the seed of Abraham. Which is his future bride. So now, all of this, this already not yet principle that's really important to see the scriptures with. We are really to see ourselves as married to him now. I know the Bible uses words of engagement and arrabon, the down payment, the engagement ring, anticipating a wedding. But we are in a real way to see ourselves as if we are already married to Christ. The actual ceremony will be in the future, but this already not yet principle is really important in all of this.
I think that helps to govern our behavior. It's hard to not think of yourself as married or espoused to Christ, and then just live willy-nilly. If that's in the forefront of your mind, especially a young couple gets engaged, they know it's serious now, and so plans are made toward that goal. Just attitudes maybe change or whatever. This is serious now, and so you begin to show that seriousness to one another. So I like your idea that we're really to see ourselves married to Christ now, and not just in the future somewhere, because by focusing on that thought now, that really does help to govern our lives and our behavior to form to what we see in the scriptures as far as the holiness.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you felt toward Vicky, but when I proposed to Jolene and she said yes, and we became engaged, my parents were going to be making a trip back east to see some family, be gone for several weeks. And they were leaving within a couple of weeks of when I became engaged. And so Jolene and I both knew that we didn't want a long engagement. And as soon as she said yes, I felt married to her.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to be official.
Yeah.
So my parents said, well, I think we set a date for like 5 weeks away or some short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
They said, well, we're going to be gone. We already have it all set. We can't really change it. And they said, can you move it a little bit later, a few more weeks later, so of course they wanted to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, how about moving it on the other side of your trip? And so we were engaged 2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks.
Saved Jolene's parents a lot of money, because they didn't have time for a big fancy wedding. Back in the days when we had a wedding cake and mixed nuts on the table. And punch. That was it.
Well, that was a win-win for you guys, wasn't it?
But I really did. I 2.5 weeks was 2.5 weeks too long for me at that point. As far as I really did feel married. Yeah. And I didn't want a long engagement. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of how we're supposed to be toward Christ is the anticipation of actually being married to him is so real and so strong. It's as if it has already taken place and we are to live as the bride of Christ. Mm-hmm. So that's what you're talking about. It should govern our actions right now.
It should, yeah. In our situation, I proposed to her on the campus of the Santa Clara University. There's a grassy area out there with this bench, and then this arbor over the bench. It was kind of pretty cool. Yeah. And so I got down on one knee and gave her the ring. But as far as planning it, her parents were going to pay for it. And so they needed time to, make all the preparations and everything. Mm-hmm. So that was in January that I proposed, but we were married in August. So I did have to wait. It was excruciating, let me tell you.
Yeah, I never have understood long engagements. And anyway, we don't need to talk about that. But most long engagements I've seen, it's just spending every moment talking about the wedding ceremony. Yeah. And as I often tell young couples that are engaged to be married, you put your focus on your marriage, not the wedding. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you put as much focus on your marriage as you do your wedding, you'll be in good shape. Yeah. But a lot of them don't. Yeah. Just that one day. Yeah. And that's why their marriage doesn't right. Doesn't right. Exactly. So we're talking today some about we're moving past Abraham into Isaac and Jacob. And, we're calling this part of these lessons the gospel according to Moses. So we're back in the writings of Moses and as he tries to bring out the gospel. And the life of Jacob is so interesting. We have Abraham, we have Isaac, and we have Joseph on both sides of Jacob. And we really respect them, we like their stories, but we can really relate to Jacob. He's more like us, he's more human. Maybe we should admit that. We should be more like Joseph. Yeah, he's the Apostle Peter of the Old Testament. Yeah, that's a good way to describe him. Flaws and all. Yeah. But God loved him. And one of the ways to describe the gospel or the purpose of Christ's death and resurrection is to change us from Esau to Jacob and then change us from Jacob to Israel. That progression of where we were in our carnal self and where he wants us to be a prince with God. And we spend far too much of our lives kind of floundering around in the middle, being the hill catcher, being the supplanter, the deceiver, the one always trying to figure out in his own wisdom and strength how to come out ahead, how to take advantage of others, how to prosper. And it took a lot of years for God to break him down and to get him to change from the supplanter to the prince. And that's what God's trying to do to us.
Yeah.
Or another way of putting it, he's trying to change us from the first Adam to the last Adam. And that's 2 Corinthians 3:18. The Spirit is from glory to glory. He's trying to transform us into the image of Christ. And we fight against it every step of the way. But that's his goal. So on one level, and we'll be in Genesis starting 25 today, but on one level, the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the story of a family and a bloodline chosen by God to be the carriers of those great, precious promises, chosen to be the bloodline of the coming Messiah. So we kind of elevate their stories. We love to think about them and all that. But on another level, the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and even Joseph, is the story of a dysfunctional family. And I'm glad God put those parts in there because it's the story of every family, just to different degrees. Every family is dysfunctional. My mom and dad were both broken people when they met each other and got married. My mom's mom had died when she was 7, and she was shipped out to California to live with the aunt and uncle, and really did not experience a whole lot of love in her life. My dad moved out here from Arkansas, shipped off to Korea. Very soon after he was there, he was captured, was a POW for 2 years. His family thought he was dead. They were broken people. And he came home and they married and raised 5 kids and took us to church and built a good life. And it shows how God can take broken lives, dysfunctional families, and bring good out of them. And that's what he did with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham had kids by 3 different women, and Isaac and Rebekah both played favorites with Esau and Jacob. Rebekah deceived her own husband, and Jacob agreed to it. And by the time he had to flee for his life, him and his beloved mother never saw each other again. I mean, it was a big price he had to pay. Big price Rebekah had to pay. And the conflict between Esau and Jacob, Jacob basically stealing the birthright from Esau by threatening to let him starve. I mean, it's really a lot of dysfunction in those families of Christ's bloodline, yet in spite of all that mess, God still works through dysfunctional families, far from perfect individuals, and is able to accomplish his will. We've seen it over and over as pastors. We've seen it in our own lives. But through all of it, he still has that single goal of bridal relations with his son in spite of our dysfunction. And we praise him for it. It's just amazing.
Absolutely.
That he can take us as such lofty goals for us, and we know how far short of it we fall every day.
Paul said that we have this treasure, and that's what you're talking about, this treasure, this blessing, this birthright blessing, all of it, prospect of being married to Christ. We have it in earthen vessels so that he shines and not us.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's the message all the way through, isn't it? So God's trying to change us from Esau to Jacob and from Jacob to Israel. Abram was given those promises of a multitude, and he was married to a barren woman. Rebecca was barren.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel and even Leah for a time
Mm-hmm.
were barren.
Mm-hmm.
But God was trying to instill in them something very, very deep, mysterious, and important. That's what Romans 4 talks about, doesn't it? Verse 17. That Abraham believed God as one who gives life to the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew it in his own life, didn't he? He gives life to the dead. Jesus was born from dead wombs
Mm-hmm.
because God gives life to the dead. And we serve a God who is a God of life. He raises dead people. And through his Son, he raises spiritually dead people and gives them life.
Mm-hmm.
Gives them a promise of a future resurrection. It's pretty amazing.
It is. Even when he freed them from Egypt, he waited until they were just in such an utter despair. There's no way they could have helped themselves. I mean, they couldn't mount an army. They didn't have any weaponry. He just waited till that extreme situation was so dire, and then he freed them. So it just always he always comes out on top. Says, "Look, you can't do this on your own. You need me," and that's all he's trying to show us is that we need to surrender.
So here in Genesis 25, the Bible does what it does so often in the book of Genesis. In verse 12, it deals with the ungodly line, in this case Ishmael, and then dispenses with them,
Mm-hmm.
and then refocuses back on the godly line.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens in verse 19, the generations of Isaac. And then it starts from there. But it says Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to be his wife. And we find in, let me see, verse 26, he was 60 years old, 80 years old, when she bore Esau and Jacob. So the reason I point that out, it says in verse 21, Isaac entreated, or we would say begged or pleaded,
Mm-hmm.
but the Old English word is entreated. It's much more deeper than just ask. So Isaac begged the Lord, let's say, pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But how long did he pray? He was 40 years old when he married her, and he was 60 years old when they were born. So for 20 straight years, he pleaded with the Lord. We see this story over and over, don't we? We see it with
Mm-hmm.
Hannah and Samuel. We see it in a number of other cases. No doubt Sarah had pleaded with the Lord. Abraham had pleaded with the Lord. So 20 years. And so the bloodline of Christ came from dead bodies all the way through.
Yeah. Amazing.
But God pronounced something to Rebekah. Verse 22, the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? I like that verse. That's something we say, don't we? We all ask this very question sometimes. That if I'm trying to do your will, and you're trying to fulfill your promises in me, why is life such a struggle? Why are things so difficult?
Yeah.
Why is there so much discomfort and setbacks and pain?
Mm-hmm.
20 years, Isaac pleaded on behalf of his wife, and the Lord finally answers his prayer, but it's still not easy.
Right.
I mean, that's what people think.
Uh-huh.
People think, well, I'll pray that God not only answer my prayer, but He give me a smooth life. Give me a comfortable life.
Mm-hmm.
Answer it in a way that brings peace and joy and happiness and all those wonderful things.
Who was it? The expression "smooth things" come to mind. Was that?
Jeremiah, preach unto us smooth things.
Smooth things, yeah.
Preach unto us smooth things. And New Testament talks about people will have itching ears, wanting people to tickle their ears, tell them the things that make them feel good. And that's what a lot of so-called Christian churches today. It's just kind of pep speeches, kind of, how can I live a better life and be a better person, but not really get down to the nitty-gritty of what Christianity is all about. Christianity is suffering before resurrection, pain before glory.
Mm-hmm.
And people like to jump right to the glory part without going through the take your cross daily. And they leave off that part. But God told her in verse 23, 2 nations are in thy womb, 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. The one people shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. And we know in Romans 9, this is dealt with under the subject of election. And because it is talking about 2 brothers, there's a tendency for people to think this is talking about God choosing who would be saved and God choosing who would not be saved. Personal election unto salvation.
Right.
But in context, in Romans 9, Paul is certainly dealing with, and I think God is dealing with here to Rebekah, who I'm choosing, who the carrier of the promises will be. Therefore, it is more of a corporate election idea unto keeping the blessing, as we talked about, the package of promises, rather than speaking about election unto personal salvation. And to understand the idea of corporate election, and in our case, the church, to understand the local visible church is to more easily understand this, what I'm talking about. But if you don't understand the local visible church, and you have the church made up of all the saved, then it becomes much easier to see that as election unto salvation. And so I know there are groups of what we call Calvinists who teach this as talking about election unto salvation of individuals who still hold to a belief of the local church. Now, I don't understand.
That's an odd mix.
Yeah, it is an odd mix, but I grew up with a number of them who were just as strong on the church as could be. They preach powerful sermons on the church and local only, it's visible only. When it comes to the subject of election, apply it more in a personal sense unto salvation, rather than what we hold to, you and I, is it's more of the idea of he has an elect son, and he's developing an elect people to be married to his son.
I see that situation as a heavy influence of Protestantism. It's gotten its foot in the door of their thinking, and instead of being consistent, like what you're talking about, a lot of inconsistency rolls in when you try to wrestle with the Protestants' view of salvation, the church, and all that, and you mix it in with what you understand it to be local only. Unless you boot it out completely, it's just going to be one big confused mess.
Yes.
So I would challenge our viewers, if there are any of our viewers who hold to the Calvinistic approach, to I would just issue a challenge that you rethink that position and try to be more consistent and view God's election as corporate, not as a personal individual situation.
Mm-hmm. And this would be tied in with what Malachi opens up with, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated.
Yeah.
As if it's a love and hatred regarding their personal salvation before they were born.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's the only time that actual term is recorded in the Old Testament, is in the final book of the Old Testament,
Mm-hmm.
God looking back at them.
Yeah.
And of course, it's quoted in Romans. But well, there's just a lot in this we could get into, but we're trying to keep it on track. We see Jacob's nature right away. By the way, that quote in Malachi, you look at the context of that, and I'm sure you have. Israel was complaining, we're God's people, and God's not blessing us, and we're just having a tough time of it. And when God said that in Malachi 1, Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated, you look at it in context, God is basically saying, you think you got it so bad? How about trading places? You came from Esau. You want to trade places? Look at your history and look at their history. You've sinned and I've had to judge you, but would you want to be from Ishmael and Esau, or would you want to be from Isaac and Jacob? So, again, looking at it more nationally or corporately. So we see Jacob's nature right away. Her days to be delivered were fulfilled. There were twins in her womb. The first came out red all over like a hairy garment. They called his name Esau. And after that, his brother came out. His hand took hold of Esau's heel. There's that. Even at birth, there's his nature.
Yeah.
Trying to supplant, trying to take advantage of his brother.
Even a child is known by his ways.
And they grow up two completely different people.
Mm-hmm.
They look differently. They had different interests. And their parents chose favorites. Naturally, Isaac loved the fact that Esau could go out and bring in food. He was a manly man.
Manly man, yeah.
And Jacob was more domestic. He enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
being closer to home. He
Yeah.
was a mama's boy to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
And Isaac and Rebekah kind of tried to use that to their advantage.
I guess you could say one took after more like Nimrod, and the other more like Abel.
Hmm.
If you don't look at other personalities, that might be close.
So Esau ends up, we know the story, sells his birthright. Of course, Jacob takes advantage of it. He sees an opportunity. And this is how we as children of God, as supposedly the people of God, boy, we sure mix in our flesh nature so much. And we're always scheming and plotting, figuring out a way to get advantage, to get ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And, we sometimes dress it up in Christian clothes, as I call it, say, well, that's just Christian principles of being smart, being wise, working hard,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get ahead. But, we're pretty good at also including deceptive methods
Mm-hmm.
and questionable ethics and those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Jacob, there's a lot of Jacob in us is really the truth.
I like how you framed it a little while ago, where God's trying to move us from Esau to Jacob to Israel.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for some reason we get kind of stuck there at Jacob, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
And never advance on to Israel.
Yeah.
And that's a lifetime of God working in us, isn't it, to get us from Jacob to Israel?
It is, yeah.
So, of course, Esau sells his birthright, and he makes that famous statement when Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright," in verse 31. Here's really the heart of why God chose Jacob at their birth, because God, being God, knew what their nature would be.
Mm-hmm.
And in spite of all of Jacob's flaws, he loved the birthright, didn't he? And he wanted the blessing. And he may have had a bunch of carnality mixed in, but the desire was there. And the understanding of the value of it was there.
Yes.
And to Esau, it had no value.
Mm-hmm.
And he was willing to sell it for a bowl of stew. And he said, make that famous statement, verse 32, "What profit shall this birthright do to me?" He saw no value in it. His need to be fed physically, his physical needs were more valuable to him than what the birthright represented.
Mm-hmm.
And for all of Jacob's carnality, he saw the value of it. There's a lot to learn in that. Too many have this opinion that Esau had. They don't see the value of the birthright, but it's everything, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's everything.
Yeah. And I suppose if you tie all this in with their character, like you said, he was a mighty hunter, a manly man, and all that. Mm-hmm. That was all external. That's on the outside. The inside, he really despised what God had given him. Mm-hmm. And so here's Jacob, more of a, like I said, a mama's boy on the outside, but on the inside, he valued that prize. He valued because he knew that it was a blessing from God, and he wanted that blessing at all costs. And so it's funny how the world kind of divides itself into that same camp. Some are all about this world, all about the now, and others see that there's more beyond what we see now, and they have their eye on the prize, as it were.
Well, giving up that firstborn birthright position is what Esau was giving up.
Yes,
absolutely. In context of us in the New Testament, if we give that up to satisfy the flesh, and that's all that bowl of stew represents, is to satisfy the flesh, we forfeit the bride. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty big deal.
Yes, it is a big deal.
And it seems like in our long ministries, we've seen a lot of people give that up to satisfy the flesh. Mm-hmm. And it might just be a better job. It might be they want another mate. Mm-hmm. It might be there's a variety of reasons, but they're all to satisfy the flesh. Mm-hmm. And they're just willing for, in many cases, very little, a bowl of stew.
Yeah.
To give up something. I mean, you're talking about, if you put it in terms of money, the bowl of stew is a penny and the birthright is $1 million. Mm-hmm. It's just so out of whack, so out of sync.
It is. And that's what Jesus was trying to tell them. All these things the Gentiles seek, because that's what life means to them. With their plurality of gods and their plurality of doctrines, they really haven't hit upon or landed upon the real true meaning of life and the one creator. And so they're seeking life in many different directions. He says, but I'm telling you, I will supply, because of the covenant, right? Mm-hmm. I will supply all of your needs. And all you need to do is just seek me first before father or mother or brother or sister or husband or wife, whatever, property. I said, just put me first. I'll take care of all the details. Just keep your eye on the prize. That's all he's asking.
Yep. Seek first the kingdom.
Seek first the kingdom. Yeah.
Which means seeking the king.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
And his righteousness.
Yeah.
His right ways.
Yeah. And I like the way that really is the emphasis. And I hope that when we talk about the bride and that position and the blessings, I really do want people to understand that what you just said, it really is all about the king himself. It's just that what we see in the Bible is that the king wants to share his kingdom and his glory. And so we're just recognizing that fact. It really is Jesus that we're looking for to be inside the city and to fellowship with him. The fact that he wants to share his inheritance, that's great. But can you imagine having Jesus, the accessibility to Jesus and sitting and learning every day inside that city from him personally? That's really the main prize. The rest of it's kind of, gravy, let's just say. But the heart of it is to be able to be with Jesus and fellowship with him on a continuing basis. That's the heart of the whole thing.
Yes, it is. I was just looking at my notes, and I was going to be going into chapters 27 and 28 and 32 and 35 of the life of Jacob and the continuing where he gets the blessing where they deceive Isaac and what happens as a result, and the 2 trips to Bethel, and there's just way too much and I need to get going here. So I think that'll be a whole separate session. There's a lot in there. We'll pick up in chapter 27 next time.
Okay.
Work through the life of Jacob and how it pictures our life with Christ, how that Jesus is the true Prince of God, the true Israel. On Wednesday nights, we're going through the Gospel of John, and he said at the end of chapter 16, be of good cheer, which is really courage. Be of good courage. I have overcome the world. And that's really what Israel in the Old Testament means, is overcomer in the New Testament, to be a prince or ruler or overcomer with God. And Jesus is the true overcomer, and through him we can overcome and become a prince of God. So there's so much connection between what's happening in the life of Jacob, what is intended to happen to us, and it's all about our connection to the true Prince of God, Christ. And that's how the whole Bible develops that way.
And then expanding out from there is an attachment to his plan, the prince's plan, which then encompasses a community. And that's what we're talking about as far as the garden and the city. So he wants to rein in his family of overcomers and put a robe on them, a bridal garment, and to display them before all the world that these were those who loved me first and foremost. And so he won't be ashamed to put them on display, as it were. Well, I'm excited. This was very, very good, brother. I tell you, this was really, really good. And you're just getting warmed up, aren't you?
Yes, there's a lot more to talk about. That's for sure.
Yes.
So maybe we'll get through the life of Jacob next week. Although if we're going to be talking about, we have to talk about Joseph because he's the most complete type of Christ. There's so many things about Christ in Joseph. So if we talk about Joseph, we'll have to be talking about Jacob some more. So we'll get into all that, but they're just who knows how many more sessions to get through Genesis. But as we've said all along, it lays so much of the foundation that's important for us to take some time in Genesis. Before we get into the rest of the Old Testament.
Well, it's a good foundation, and I appreciate all your studies. And What sermon number are you on as far as teaching at the church?
Well, what we're dealing with today in this lesson was sermon number 10.
Okay.
And I think this coming Sunday I'll be preaching sermon number 33. So we have a ways to go.
You have a ways to go. Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're not feeling rushed or just trying to, blow through this. I'm glad that you're taking time and breaking it down for our audience because they're not there. I'm not there to drink in all of it.
Well, you and I both have learned from watching other YouTube videos of maybe some Bible lessons or something that, it's not like being live in front of a group of people where you feel the press of time more.
Mm-hmm.
On these kind of videos, you can just cover what you want to cover.
Yeah.
And you know that the people watching them, they may watch it over the course of 3 or 4 efforts to watch one session.
Yeah.
They will watch 15 minutes and they have to go do something and come back,
right.
Pick up where they left off. And so the oppressive feeling, the time factor is not as much.
Yeah.
So we can just kind of relax and go through it and bring out whatever we want to bring out.
Amen.
We don't have that luxury on Sunday mornings and behind a pulpit, do we?
Right. Yeah. Especially if there's a potluck day and you smell the food coming in,
Now that's pressure, isn't it?
That is pressure. Oh, good talking with you, brother. Good visit today. Really good session.
I thought I heard a rumor recently. It is told as if it was the truth.
Well, most rumors are.
Some Baptist pastor in the South was asked to resign because he recommended they do away with their potlucks or something.
Well, he deserved it then, didn't he?
That's worse than that. It's almost worse than heresy, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it is. Oh man.
Good talking to you, Mike.
All right, good talking to you. I'll let you go, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, Mike.
Okay. Right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye now.